scenario-based training. Of course, we're going to talk about marking cartridge training. We're going to talk about defensive tactics, scenario-based training, and some of the mistakes that I see instructors make. And here's the thing about it, guys. I'm not perfect. I've made numerous mistakes in training, and so that's some of the reasons why I want to talk to you today about some of those mistakes that I've made, which I think will help you. And that's some of the things that we talk about in our instructor courses as well, when we do our teaching and our learning methods. So when we talk about scenario-based training, let's start off with marking cartridge training. Some of you call it simunitions training, those kind of things. And when we're talking about training, scenario-based training in general, it needs to be realistic, and what do I mean by that? I mean, no ninjas coming out of the ceiling, not placing officers in scenarios where the training is not something that they would see out on the street, something that they can win. And that's with any scenario. We want to make sure that they always have a scenario that they can win. What I would suggest also is, if you're going to do scenario-based training for if it comes to DT, if it's like I said, marking cartridge training, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Have a lesson plan in place. Have a set of goals that you're going to set out, that you're going to have that for that scenario, that you're going to learn from that scenario, that you expect a little check-off list of objectives that are met for that scenario, and go through each one, making sure that they're meeting those objectives that you have for that scenario, and in that way it's the same thing every time. Also, having good role players, guys. I can't stress that it's more important than you know. Having people that have the same kind of mindset you do when you're doing your training, and what is your goal during training, and that's for them to learn. That's for them to take the things they learn in training and to be able to translate that into the street environment to where they're able to protect themselves and the officers and the citizens that are around them. So if you don't have people that have that type of mindset and are there for their own reasons, then it's not going to be a successful training in general, because you're going to have to deal with those individuals as well. And do I see it happen? Of course I do, yeah. I've seen where they bring in people to help during scenarios and they don't give them any guidance. So what happens is you have your objectives that you're trying to learn, and those individuals tend to try to change the outcome a little bit because they get bored, or they want to see what this person does because it's a friend of theirs, or they don't like this person, so they want to see what they'll do during this particular scenario. So we want to make sure that they know what the learning objectives are. What is the goal of that scenario? Are those learning objectives being met? And what I would do is sit down and tell them, hey, here's the a form that has exactly what you're going to say, what you're going to do, how I expect you to act during the scenario, so that they understand your route and what you expect from them, your goals. So, of course, keeping it realistic, very important. Making sure you have a lesson plan, a checklist, very important. Positive training environment. Guys, I cannot stress this enough because I see it happen on a regular basis. You must have an environment to where your students want to be there. And I know you say, well, I teach in-service training, and not all of them want to be there. And you're correct. Not all of them want to be there. But I can guarantee you this. If you provide them with a positive training environment, even the ones that don't want to be there eventually will come around. And you say, well, no, I've done it. I'm telling you, give them time. Work with them. So are there ones in the class, the what-ifers? Of course there are. And you're going to have those. And you're going to have the ones that don't want to see you succeed as an instructor. And the thing about it, the way you address that during training reflects on you as an instructor, not on them. People see the way that they're acting, but they're watching you as an instructor, how you deal with that individual. And are there sometimes in cases where you have to pull that person aside immediately because it's a safety hazard or something else is going on, and you have to address it there? Of course. But we want to be as positive as possible when we're dealing with those individuals. Encouragement is our job. We want to encourage them to do better. We want to encourage them to want to come back. Now, is everyone that comes through your scenario-based training, are they all going to be able to perform exactly the same way as your best student. No, they're not. But we still want to keep them on board. We still want them to come back. We still want them to want to be there. Because what happens, guys, those people in your agency then go out at you as an instructor, and they talk to other people in your agency, and they tell them, hey, I didn't have a good time. I didn't enjoy myself. I thought it was horrible training. And then it reflects on you as an instructor, and then others, because it's that water cooler talk, maybe start to believe some of the things that they're saying. And keeping it positive is so important. I've seen instructors, where they belittle the student, they talk down to them. And if you're that kind of instructor, guys, you have a long road ahead of you. You really do. And I understand challenging students, and that's not what I'm talking about. Keeping them motivated, challenging them, pushing them as an individual. I have no issue with that. Still, at the end of the day, they should win. But when you belittle students or in a class, or you bring them out in front of others and you know that they're not going to be able to succeed in this, it really says something about you, not about them. So making sure that you're keeping that training positive for them, because again, you're not there for yourself. You're there for your students. You're there for your fellow officers who depend on you as an instructor to give them the information to be able to survive out on the streets, so that we as instructors don't have to go to our brothers and our sisters' funerals. We provide them with the information that hopefully protects them and saves their lives. And at the end of the day, if you're able to have one individual to come up to you and say, you know what, the information that I learned from you saved my life, it allowed me to go home to my family, then you've done your job. Doing a scenario over again, very important. And the reason I say this is because, have you ever in your life had something that you've done and you said, you know what, if I could just do that again, one more time, I know I would get it right. Why not? I've seen instructors, when they teach scenarios, they say, well, we've got all these people that we want to get through these scenarios. And they don't think about it in the terms that they want to make sure that they're meeting those learning. I don't care if you run them through one scenario, and that's the only scenario they do all day. As long as they get that one right, at the end of the day, they'll be able to solve so many problems out there from that one scenario. We get in such a thing, like I said, where we've set out, let's say, 4 scenarios for the day. And we said, oh, we got to get through all 4 of them. No, we don't. We just got to make sure that we get through the ones that each one of them are correct. Each student walks away with a blueprint of that scenario. And with that blueprint, they're able to solve other problems. So that's what we want to make sure that we're doing, is allow them to do it over. I don't care if they got to do it 5 times in a row. Maybe it's a defensive tactics scenario that you've set up within your agency. And they say, you know what, take a 10-minute break. Think about, let's go over some of the things that you've said that you can improve on. And that's the other thing too, is when you go in there and you correct, it's not to correct an individual. Let them come up with the solutions of what they believe that they got wrong. And most of the time they already know. They don't need you to tell them, hey, you got this wrong, you got that wrong, you got this wrong, you got that wrong. Say, hey, you did this. Why did you do that? And they may say a legitimate reason for why they did it. They may say, based on policy and this, and you may say, hey, you know what, you're correct. The scenario may not have been written in such a way that it accounted for what they're talking about. Or what they did was a valid option. And here's the reason why they did it. But also you may say, you know what, you did this in a scenario. Is there anything else you could have done? And they say, well, you know what, I could have done this instead. You know what, I think you're right. Let's do that again. Let's do the scenario again. And let's correct that. And then they come back and they do it again, and they get it right, and it makes them feel good. And at the end of the day, they walk away with that blueprint again. That's such a positive interaction for them to take that and go out onto the street and solve problems. So, again, make sure that you're allowing them to do those scenarios over and over again. When it comes to safety, guys, marking cartridge training, semi-munitions training, either way you want to call it, defensive tactics training, if you're going to courses where they're not having any type of safety measures in place, if they're not telling their students beforehand that there's no guns that are brought into the room, and then actually doing pat downs, if they're not, especially when it comes to simulations, marking cartridge training, guys, if they're not doing safety measures, if they're not providing the correct equipment, when you're shooting those marking cartridges, simulation rounds, they can kill you. Understand that. Don't be in such a situation and think it's paintball. It's not. There's neck protection you should be wearing. There's head protection you should be wearing. There's growing protection that should be worn. Gloves that should be worn. Those things are equipment that are necessary. And I've seen departments and instructors disregard some of that, or the department doesn't provide all the equipment. And then they say, well, you know what, we're just going to have to improvise. Stuffing socks down the front of their pants, or you don't want to be in that type of situation. If you go to a class where their safety measures are not in place, especially like I said with the simulations training, and they're not checking for weapons. They're not when they come back from lunch, they're not checking for weapons. They're not doing the necessary procedures to let people walk in and out with firearms on their sides. If they don't have the protective equipment, you don't need to be there, because each year it seems that officers are killed in that type of training, and it's easily preventable. So we want to try to make sure that we're not placing ourselves in that type of situation. And I can guarantee that I or Blue Shield will never place you in that type of situation. We do everything we can to make sure that the training is safe, and that you learn something. The other thing that they're talking about when defensive tactics, and of course that's what we specialize in, instructor courses for defensive tactics, and if you're watching this video you probably know that. Making sure, if you're teaching, especially in academy settings, guys, these are kids. Most of these people in the academy are kids. They've never been in a fight in their entire lives. So we take them and we beat them up. I've seen academies that do that. They place them in a situation where the kid walks out of there, the young man or young woman walks out of there, and the only fight they've ever been in their lives, they've lost. Now, I'm not saying not push these students, again, these young officers, these recruits. Putting them in a situation to where you push them to the brink, that's fine. But at the end of that, you will encourage them to win. Why? Because when they're out there on the street, we want them to engage. Now, if you sit there and you beat them up during their defensive tactics training, and that's the only exposure they've ever had to an actual conflict, to a physical fight in their lives, they're going to say, you know what, the only time I ever got in a fight was during the academy and I lost, because the instructor just beat me up. That's not the goal of defensive tactics scenario training. The goal is for them to come out with a positive training experience and to learn something. And some of them, like I said, are going to do better than others. There's some you're going to have your star students. You're going to have the ones that are over there and they're getting everything, or maybe they've had previous training and they're getting everything you're saying. That's the reason why we have it multiple hours per year. And I guarantee you this, right now we're not meeting that mark as law enforcement agencies. We're not doing enough training. We can't train people 4 hours every once a year or every 2 years in multiple techniques and then expect them to be able to perform the way we want them to perform.